Sign it, or I'll drag this out for years until you're completely bankrupt, my mother snarled, shoving a stack of legal documents across the marble table of the $5.5 million penthouse. She looked at me with pure disdain, convinced she and my brother had finally cornered me. They thought taking away the luxury property my grandmother left solely to me would crush my spirit and leave me with nothing. My lawyer practically begged me not to sign, whispering that we could win in court, but I looked my mother dead in the eye, picked up the pen, and signed every single page. I grabbed my purse, walked out, and didn't say a word. Everyone thought I'd lost my mind. But what my mother didn't know was that her own lawyer would be frantically calling her the very next morning, terrified out of his mind. My name is Olivia Carter. At 38 years old, I learned the hard way that blood isn't thicker than water when millions of dollars are on the line. When my grandmother passed away, she left her crown jewel directly to me, a stunning $5.5 million penthouse in the heart of the city. Grandma knew how hard I'd worked to take care of her during her final years, while the rest of the family barely bothered to call. But the moment the will was read, my family turned into vultures. My mother, Eleanor, and my younger brother, Julian, couldn't digest the fact that I had been handed everything while they received modest cash stipends. Within 48 hours of the funeral, they cornered me in the penthouse's sprawling living room. Julian stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, smirking as if he already owned the place, while my mother slapped a thick stack of legal papers onto the marble dining table. "You don't deserve this, Olivia," Eleanor hissed, her eyes dark with fury. "Julian needs this property to establish his business standing. You're going to sign this quitclaim deed and transfer ownership to your brother immediately." When I refused, my mother leaned in close, her voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "Sign it, or I'll drag this out in court for years until you're completely bankrupt. You won't see a dime, and I'll ruin you." My attorney, David, grabbed my arm, his knuckles white with tension. "Olivia, don't do it," he whispered frantically, leaning over the marble table. "This is classic intimidation. We can file an injunction tomorrow morning. If we fight this in probate court, we have a rock-solid case. Your grandmother's intent was crystal clear." I looked down at the smooth blue ink pen resting beside the documents. David was right about the law, but he didn't know what I knew. 2 weeks before she passed, Grandma had called me to her bedside. She was sharp as a tack until her very last breath. She told me about a massive, hidden financial maneuver she had engineered, a complex web of historic preservation assessments, deferred structural maintenance fees, and an outstanding commercial lien attached directly to the penthouse's deed. She had deliberately restructured the property's legal title, turning it into a gilded Trojan horse. She warned me that if Eleanor and Julian ever tried to wrest the property away through force or legal trickery, I should let them take it. "Greed blinds people to the fine print, darling," she had whispered with a faint smirk. I looked up at my mother. Eleanor's jaw was set, her eyes gleaming with cold triumph. Beside her, Julian crossed his arms, practically vibrating with arrogant satisfaction. They genuinely believed they had broken me. Without saying a single word, I picked up the pen. David gasped, reaching out to stop me, but I slid my hand past his and signed my name on every single line of the quitclaim deed. I capped the pen, picked up my handbag, and looked my mother dead in the eye. "It's all yours," I said softly. As I walked out of the penthouse, leaving them gloating over the signed papers, I couldn't help but smile. They thought they had just taken my fortune. In reality, they had just signed their own financial death warrant. Within 48 hours of signing the papers, Julian moved into the penthouse like a king claiming his throne. He didn't waste a single second. Before my grandmother's estate was even fully settled, he was throwing lavish weekend parties, popping $1,000 bottles of champagne, and posting endless tours of the property on social media. My mother was right there beside him, holding court among our extended family. She called aunts, uncles, and family friends, telling anyone who would listen how she had saved the family legacy from her selfish daughter. To the rest of the world, Julian was a rising young mogul living in a $5.5 million high-rise, and I was the bitter, ousted sister who had been forced to surrender. Meanwhile, I quietly rented a modest 2-bedroom apartment across town. I didn't reach out to mutual friends, and I didn't respond to the petty, indirect jabs my brother posted online. I just let them celebrate. Instead, I met privately with my grandmother's personal accountant and tax attorney. We reviewed the transfer documents I had signed. Because I had voluntarily executed a quitclaim deed transferring the penthouse directly to Julian as an immediate personal transfer, Rather than letting it pass through a structured probate trust, he had officially accepted the property as is, absorbing every attached legal and financial encumbrance with full personal liability. My grandmother had deliberately deferred years of high-yield structural assessments and a massive commercial lien tied to the penthouse's private elevator and terrace renovations. As long as the property remained in her estate or under my name and trust, those payments were shielded under a specialized grace period. But the moment title ownership transferred to Julian, the entire multi-million-dollar hammer was set to fall instantly. The euphoria in Julian's new luxury kingdom lasted less than 72 hours. It was a Tuesday morning when the trap finally sprung. Julian and my mother were having breakfast on the penthouse terrace, admiring the sweeping city view, when Eleanor's phone began ringing uncontrollably. It was Richard Vance, their family estate attorney, the very man who had drafted the quitclaim transfer documents to help them take the property from me. When Eleanor answered on speakerphone, Vance didn't offer a polite greeting. His voice was trembling with pure panic. "Eleanor, tell me Julian hasn't officially recorded that quitclaim deed with the county clerk yet," Vance stammered, his words coming out in a frantic rush. "Of course he did, Richard," Eleanor replied, chuckling with smug pride. "He registered it yesterday afternoon. The penthouse is officially in Julian's name." "Why?" A heavy, agonizing silence hung over the line before Vance let out a breath of absolute despair. "You fools," he breathed. "You just walked directly into a landmine." Vance explained that by rushing the transfer to bypass probate and strip me of ownership, they had triggered a series of immediate enforcement clauses embedded in the property's title. Because Julian took title as is via quitclaim, he had personally assumed $1.8 million in combined liabilities, 3 years of back taxes, delinquent historic preservation assessments, and a massive balloon payment on a commercial structural lien. Under probate law, those debts would have been negotiated or covered by estate liquidations. But because Julian was now the sole owner of record, the city and the lien holders weren't coming after my grandmother's estate. They were coming directly after Julian. And because the grace period had expired upon transfer, the entire $1.8 million was due within 30 days, backed by immediate personal asset seizure notices. The smug confidence my mother and brother had displayed just days earlier evaporated into sheer terror. Panic set in as official legal notices, municipal code violation fines, and immediate debt collection letters began flooding the penthouse mailbox. The city was threatening to place a tax levy on Julian's personal accounts and force an emergency auction of the property if the $1.8 million wasn't settled immediately. Predictably, my mother turned to her favorite tactic, trying to manipulate me. My phone began ringing off the hook. Eleanor left dozens of frantic voicemails, her voice shifting wildly from fake warmth to hysterics. "Olivia, darling, there's been a terrible administrative mistake with the penthouse papers," she pleaded in one message. "We need to sit down as a family and transfer the title back into the trust right away." When I didn't answer, Julian started texting me nonstop, begging me to take back the penthouse or sign a co-liability waiver. The same brother who had smirked at me while taking my inheritance was now desperately pleading for me to save him from financial ruin. I didn't reply to a single text or return a single call. I sat comfortably in my new apartment, sipping tea and watching their panic unfold from a distance. They thought they could force me into a corner with legal threats and walk away with a $5.5 million prize. They had no idea that my silence was calculated. I gave my attorney explicit instructions. Under no circumstances were we to accept any communication regarding a title transfer reversal. By law, Julian was the sole owner, and the clock was ticking fast. Every day they spent trying to track me down was another day closer to total financial seizure. 2 weeks later, my mother finally forced a meeting through our attorneys. She demanded we meet at Richard Vance's office, threatening to file a lawsuit claiming I had fraudulently concealed the penthouse's financial liabilities when I signed the quitclaim deed. When David and I walked into the conference room, Eleanor and Julian looked like ghosts of their former selves. The arrogant smirks were completely gone, replaced by hollow eyes and desperate expressions. "You trapped us," Eleanor spat, slamming her hands on the table the moment I sat down. "You knew about the $1.8 million in debts, Olivia. You deliberately concealed material facts to ruin your brother." David calmly opened his briefcase and pulled out the signed transfer documents from our first meeting. "Mrs. Carter," David said, his voice cold and precise, "I strongly suggest you review the document your son signed. Section 4 explicitly states that Julian took ownership via quitclaim as is, waiving any full audit, disclosure requirement, or prior financial inspection. David then laid down a second document, a notarized affidavit signed by Eleanor and Julian's own attorney on the day of the transfer, asserting that they were demanding immediate execution of the deed without condition or delay. "You threatened to drag my client through years of litigation to take this property," David continued, leaning forward. "You insisted on taking full title immediately. Under contract law, my client had zero legal obligation to advise you on a deed you forced her to sign under duress." Richard Vance put his head in his hands, letting out a defeated sigh. "He's right, Eleanor," Vance admitted softly. "We have no grounds for fraud. You insisted on skipping the disclosures." Julian collapsed back into his chair, pale and speechless. The legal trap was completely airtight. Without any legal loophole or way to force the debt back onto me, Julian was driven into a corner. To avoid personal bankruptcy and municipal asset seizure, he was forced to put the penthouse on the market for a distressed, emergency sale. Because of the heavy liens and urgent timeline, it sold for far below its market value. Every single cent from the sale went directly toward clearing the $1.8 million in back taxes, structural assessments, and legal penalties. By the time the dust settled, Julian was left with absolutely nothing, except a ruined credit score and a mountain of legal bills. My mother's dream of elevating Julian into luxury backfired completely, leaving both of them financially broke and socially humiliated among our extended family. As for me, I received my clean, unencumbered share of my grandmother's remaining cash estate. I used a portion of those funds to secure my comfortable apartment and invest wisely for my future, entirely free from debt and toxic family dynamics. Grandma had seen right through their greed from the very beginning. She knew that the greatest trap you can set for arrogant people is simply letting them have exactly what they think they're entitled to.